Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to pause briefly for a prayer, and then Frank's going to lead us in a time of sharing. And you're free to keep eating during that time and go back and get more food, feel comfortable doing that. But we will begin the sharing after a prayer. Please join me. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. We thank you for the gift of life, and we thank you especially this day for Marlin's life and all that he has meant to us. Bless us now and bless this food to the strength of our bodies. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Great. I'm going to start with a few personal reflections, and then we'll just kind of open things up. And if you would like to say something, a remembrance, a story about Marlin, please just raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone around. So my name is Frank Hess, and I grew up next to the Jeschke clan on Carter Road. We moved to Goshen in 1978 from the East Coast, from Baltimore, Maryland. And it was a transition, I have to admit, I was not ready for. It was the first couple months were hard. I wasn't used to the weather. I remember being shocked by the first time a storm system blew through. And it doesn't seem like they blow through as hard today as they used to. Just rapid change of weather freaked me out. The whole environment freaked me out. They were saying pop instead of soda, and so on and so forth. And it was a difficult transition, but one of the things that made that transition happen and really settled me into life in Goshen was having the Jeschke kids next door, and Marlin and Charmaine as well. It was, they became 3 lifelong friends, and were a never-ending source of interest, amusement, fun. Marlin and Charmaine managed on Marlin's then meager Goshen College wage. I mean, wages now are not as bad as they were then, but it was meager. They managed to create an environment in their household that really encouraged their kids' interests, their creativity, whether it was Margaret's cigar box dollhouse, David's probing into now obscure computer languages upstairs, Eric's obsessions with various microdexterity skills, the frisbee, the nail delays, the hang delays. He was a whiz, and you did not want to challenge this guy to a foosball match either. It was just an environment that was full of creative foment, and it was a real privilege to be able to grow up next to that. Marlin was a big part of that. He really gave his children an environment in which they could flourish, and gave them intellectual guidance. I remember him as being a real model in terms of family, in terms of dealing with adversity, and in terms of pushing through. He later became also a model for me in the classroom. I attended Goshen College. And as I look around, I see so many former professors here who shaped my life. And he was one of those. I took both Marxism and Christianity, and science and religion. And my science and religion paper that I wrote for him was my writing sample for graduate school applications. He really played a major role in shaping my thought and nuancing my understanding of the world of Christianity and of the relationship between Christianity and philosophy. I owe so much to him. Have so many fond memories of life on Carter Road. So many fond memories of how he managed to take pleasure in the smaller things in life and share those pleasures, whether it was the passion for toast with butter and cinnamon and sugar. That was the marker of the Jeschke Toast Fest, as we called it. Whether it was the spun honey that he inevitably brought back from his sojourns up to Saskatchewan. And we all looked forward to when it came back. He really took a lot of pleasure in life and conveyed that pleasure in life, and taught me important lessons about how to take small pleasures in life. That is my little reflection, and please, if you are interested in sharing reflections on Marlin, I will gladly bring the microphone to you. And if you can just announce, tell everyone your name and where you're from. So,
hi, I'm Leanne Miller, one of Marlin's grandchildren, daughter of Linda and Jim. Grew up in Goshen here, so actually, yeah, not too far away from Carter Road where they lived, and we went over there. I guess I don't know how often. Quite often. Okay, every week. So I just remember a lot of fun times. Yeah, Grandpa had a lot of fun with my brother Robert and I, and he was definitely a cool grandpa. Would take us out back into the woods. We'd get to go down, wade through the creek, and wander through the forests, and yeah, had a lot of fun there. And picking cherries from the cherry tree was always fun. Got to go up on the ladders, and so that seemed like really cool. And then also, I loved the swing in the backyard, and we'd always ask him to push us like as high as we possibly could go, so we could grab the leaves from the branches of the trees with our feet. and that was always the goal. And so we got the best swing rides from Grandpa, and it was always a lot of fun.
Marlin's garden was legendary. He loved being out back. I remember the constant wars with the chipmunks.
My name is Arlene Sanderson. I'm a niece of Uncle Marlin. My mom was his sister. And my memories of Uncle Marlin were how important he felt family was. I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know why. Probably a bit emotional. But I remember his love for chokecherry and Saskatoon berry jelly. And so whenever he'd come up, he'd love to go to the berry barn and enjoy some of the prairie pleasures. And when we were little, I remember being here, and we spent some time in Chicago. My dad was taking a course there, and Uncle Marlin arranged something for us every day, off to the beach, activities, different things. So I have very good memories of his love for family and just the time that he spent with us up in Saskatchewan.
The spun honey made it back, but I don't think the chokecherry preserves made it back.
I'm Erlich, Marlin's son. Speaking of spun honey, I think you're referring to Rogers Golden Syrup, a Canadian specialty, and a critical ingredient in Marlin's favorite thing to make, which was pepper nuts. Now, if you don't know what pepper nuts are, they're a strange Ukrainian tradition or something where you make these very hard, almost indigestible, small nuggets out of flour and probably a little bit of salt and Rogers golden syrup, the critical ingredient. And he would make batches and batches of these and apparently eat them and send them to all his grandchildren and anybody else he could send them to. I know almost all of his grandchildren couldn't abide the things and would quietly set them in the trash, except for his one grandson, Tyler, my son, who loves them and would eat them for a long time.
Thanks, Eric.
I'm a nephew of Uncle Marlin. You heard from my sister, son of Anna. I'm son of Anna. one of his older sisters. And I remember I told a story around the table last night when we were eating I remember growing up on the family farm that you saw, or not, I didn't grow up there, but visiting the family farm that you saw on the slideshow from the air. And I remember when he'd come back from when he was studying in Chicago, and he'd come back and after he married Aunt Charmaine, come back to the family farm when we'd have a get-together at Christmas or whenever it was. And the tradition in rural Saskatchewan at that time, and especially in the Mennonite community that we were part of, was sort of familiar to a lot of people, and I guess it's kind of become a stereotype of some of the things that people don't like. But the women would cook the meal and clean up. The men would sit in the living room and either nod off or visit. Both were called visits, and enjoyed. And after dinner, it was alluded to in one of your speech. He thought outside of the box and opened his mind to things. And one of the things that he brought back was after dinner, he got up and said, "Well, I'm going to help with the dishes." And I looked and, what are you doing? Because that just wasn't done in our circles. And that was my early experience of him thinking outside of the box and bringing in something new into the family tradition.
You didn't say if you followed him.
I did not.
Hi, I'm Amy. I'm married to Eric, so I'm daughter-in-law of Marlin. And just a short memory I have of Marlin is I really loved that he had a mug collection, and anytime, one of his relatives' children attended a university or a college, he would get a mug from there, and that would go into his collection. So I kind of remember around the time where I saw that he had a mug from my college, and I thought, I guess I'm stuck. No. I mean, I said, woohoo, yay. So that's just a really fond memory I have of Marlin, how he would make sure he collected a mug from every college or university. And I just will say that I've been so blessed to become a member of this family. And when I think of the people I enjoy the most in life and my favorite people in the world, it's pretty much Jeschke people. So, yeah.
Marlin was so passionate about academia and about religion. I can still remember about a year and a half ago, I went with my father to visit him, and his memory was failing. He couldn't pull stuff back. But the moment we started talking about my job and Indiana University, he perked up, and his thoughts became clear. And he wanted to talk about Martin Marty. And he had a great passion for what he did professionally. And it really showed through in his teaching, too.
I'm John Bushard. I just thought I'd follow up on that very idea. So my father, Robert Bushard, was a professor of physics at Goshen and a close colleague of Marlin's for many years. And they developed a course together, Science and Religion Senior Seminar. So all of the science students, and maybe all the religion students at one time, took this course as their sort of senior seminar. So it was a fairly large class, and I took it as well. I was a physics student myself, and it was interesting that the two of them, so my father, physics professor, and Marlin, professor of religion, leading this on science and religion. And the thing many students noticed was that Marlin was hardest on the religion writers and sources we were reading, and my dad was the hardest against the scientists and challenging their views. But one thing I want particularly to remember was Marlin's sort of parting words in that class, speaking to a class that is a whole bunch of seniors in sciences and religion. and saying, you're going to go and get graduate degrees in all kinds of fields and get all kinds of expertise. What about your faith? Don't go out there and tolerate Sunday school pablum. And that's the word he used. And expect that to sustain your faith against all of this expert knowledge you're going to gain. Those were wise words, and they sort of stuck with me. It was an example of him challenging all of us to think in all areas of our lives.
I'm Crystal Miller. I married Tom Miller, who was Betty's youngest son. And I took that class, Science and Religion. Both Tom and I did. I think we kind of chatted through it a little bit. But when Marlin started dating Betty, and I somehow, at some point, we met each other again. And 10 years after I'd taken the class, he said, I remember your paper you wrote. He said something about it was a good one, and he really did remember it. I was shocked. But when I think of Marlin, I just remember how generous he was, and Tom and I often commented on that. When Betty and Marlin would come to visit us in Portland, Oregon, he would insist on paying for restaurants or whatever, and he would say, it's my privilege that I can do this. And Tom and I often commented on how generous he was.
Paul Reimer, I'm in the physics department here at Goshen College, and I too was in the Science and Religion seminar, and that made a big impression on me. It was interesting that Paul mentioned the words of Joni Mitchell, going back to the garden, and I think that was one of the ideas in that class that he had little patience for, that, it used to be so good in the good old days, it used to be so good. No, there was disease, he was looking forward. So I appreciate that. I'm teaching that Science and Religion course now, and I have so much appreciated that inheritance from Marlin. Also, growing up in Goshen, my father was from the plains of Canada, from Manitoba, not Saskatchewan, but they had that in common. I feel like I have a little bit of cred with spun honey, and that I've had it taken away from me when I've tried to come back from Canada via the TSA. That also, to put in context, one comment that I heard I don't remember what the year was, but at some point there was a potluck at College Mennonite Church, and I hadn't seen Marlin in a while, and he was apparently dating Betty, and he said, I've just stumbled into a honey pot. So I think he appreciated her.
Wait, there was somebody.
I'm Betty's brother. So I have a different perspective than a lot of people, because we really didn't learn Marlin until later in life. But a couple of things that I thought were remarkable. My sister, being my sister, was a little bit scatterbrained. And I thought he did very well at handling that. The other thing that was brought up was pepper nuts. Well, pepper nuts was a big thing in our family, and is today. Although I will agree that not everybody appreciates pepper nuts like they should. Anyway, Marlin was great. It was the go-to person if I had a serious religious question that I wanted some thought about. I appreciated his responses. He was always there for me. And I also enjoyed those few articles I could get from the local paper that he had written. And I'm hoping someday his family will put that together as a group of papers and make it available. Okay,
I'm Alice Roth, live here in Goshen. Marlin gave me a very important piece of advice once, and he helped me to follow through. Our family had settled into Elkhart County in 19 1974, after 5 years in West Africa, in Ghana. And I had studied our last year there at the University of Ghana. And I wanted very much to continue studying on religions in Africa. I found out very quickly that Notre Dame, by the words of the advisor there, has nothing they could offer for what I was interested in. So in lunchtime conversations with faculty and staff at Goshen College, we talked about lots of things, and I must have complained, whined maybe, that I could not follow up what I wanted to do. And one day Marlin said, "Alice," he didn't use these words, but the impact was, "Get off your duff and go do it." He said, "I know the head of the History of Religion Department at Northwestern University, and I will send an introduction for you, and he will help you put together a package there to do what you want." And that happened.
And the end of the story is you have a master's degree in African Studies from the Northwestern University.
My name is Vic Stolzfus. I overlapped with Marlin as an employee of Goshen College. I in administration, and he is part of the teaching faculty. But before I comment on Marlin, I'd like to offer a compliment to the family members that planned that marvelous 1-hour service. That was so well done. I go to a lot of funerals. I'm almost 90. And what I look for, if it's a person of robust faith, is an expression of that robust faith and tribute to that. And I also look for an honest accounting of the personality. Sometimes embarrassing things, many times complimentary things. That makes for a realistic and believable portrait, and I always learn something. Even of people I thought I knew very well, in groups like this, you learn something. So I also want to pay tribute to Marlin, especially with this theme that's come out a couple times, that when you have a faith, it's good to expand that faith. Now, that is offensive to people who think there is a kind of one-time, forever, unalterable expression. You have to have the very vocabulary, even the way you pronounce the words, you don't alter anything. Well, Marlin wasn't there. He felt a faith should grow. And he pointed out in his class that if it doesn't grow, and it's up against a pretty sophisticated secular interpretation of life, that faith may collapse. So the idea that we can have a faith, and it'll be different in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, because it has grown due to experience and the growth of our own understanding of God.
So much of American Christianity, it seems, has abandoned that idea. And it really, Marlin's lessons in terms of faith are profound ones, and I think ones that Christendom in general would do well to listen to. And in general, the faith that we learn here at Goshen College was profound and deep.
My name is Faye Cunningham, and I'm from Alberta, and Uncle Marlin was my uncle. He was a brother to my father, Alfred, who was the eldest of that family, and this isn't so very second eldest, well, eldest brother. So my dad told me the story of when they all sat around there were 7 children, and Grandma and Grandpa sat around a country kitchen in a small farmhouse, and Grandma, of course, baked the best bread, and there was no touching the food until after grace. However, the best piece of bread was the crust. And the minute that said amen, many fingers went for the crust. And Dad said the one that got the crust first gave it a good lick and put it on the plate so that nobody else would steal it. And a memory that I have of Uncle Marlin was one of his physical strength, which we're not talking about here so much. But the Jeschke brothers would have fun challenging each other. They were quite competitive, I think. And we lived in a house in Saskatoon, and we had one of the teleposts in our basement. And I can remember the brothers grabbing a hold of that telepost and holding their bodies out completely sideways to that telepost. And I can remember Uncle Marlin and my dad and Uncle Roland all standing there so proudly, holding each other up and putting their legs straight out from that telepost. He was not just mentally strong, he had a good physical strength too.
Those pictures, man, Marlin was cut.
Hello, my name is Trent Lapp. I have notes about who I am because after the debacle of the family introductions yesterday. So I'm son of Roger, who is son of Edna, who is sister to Marlin. I think I got it right. And unfortunately, my dad, Roger, couldn't be here on this trip because his health is not so good, and we're from Saskatchewan. But he sent extensive notes, and that's a warning, that I'm supposed to read here about our relationship to Marlin. So this may hopefully not too long, but they are extensive. So I'll read them as he wrote them. I would like to relate some memories of Uncle Marlin with our family. Our first trip to Goshen took place when Trent and Scotty were 5 and 6 years old. We were on a holiday with cousin Stan Dirks in Uncle Abe and Aunt Helen's motorhome. Some of you may know Stan and remember him. It was a great trip. We arrived at Carter Road in late afternoon, and after a good meal and some visiting, we went into the backyard to admire the many fireflies that would come out in the evening. Of course, Aunt Charmaine supplied the boys with glass jars to capture and inspect the fireflies, and of course, several got loose in the motorhome. The next couple of days were spent touring Margaret and David's school, Uncle Marlin's office, a farm auction at Chipshawana, and the old bag factory, which I remember that and not being that excited about it as a 6-year-old. Subsequent trips to Goshen included a tour of Billy Sunday's 7,500-seat tabernacle and a residence at Winona Lake, a haystack meal fundraiser put on by the Amish in support of a man whose wife had passed away, and of course, Menahoff in Chipshawana, plus several repeats of Goshen College. Uncle Marlin and I had a memorable trip into 2015. This is my dad, of course, saying this. When we attended Jared Lepp's wedding in upstate New York, Uncle Marlin had been planning to attend this event, and when I told him that I was planning on going too, he told me to buy a one-way plane fare and we would drive back to Saskatchewan together. The wedding was very interesting in that it was held in a conservative Mennonite church with 2 pastors officiating. It was just what a retired college professor of religion needed to pique his interest. After the wedding, we drove from Penn Yan, New York, back to Goshen and enjoyed a couple of days at Auntie Betty's hospitality. Then we left Betty at home and took a 2-day, 20-hour drive to Saskatoon in Uncle Marlin's Toyota Prius. It was an interesting 20 hours, even though I've heard some of the anecdotes several times over. I believe Uncle Marlin was 86 years old at the time, but when we got to our place, he bounded up the stairs 2 at a time to his bedroom, scorning the use of the railing to assist him. After visiting some of the Schmidt relatives in Saskatoon, we made a trip to Edmonton to visit Uncle Don, who was in a care home. When we got back to Saskatoon, we spent a day or so visiting more relatives here. Then Uncle Marlin jumped back into his Prius and drove home. I would like to mention that we strongly advised him to take 4 days to make the trip back to Goshen, seeing as how he was driving alone. But sure enough, we got a phone call 2 days later announcing that he had arrived back in Goshen in great shape. He had navigated the busy streets of Chicago both there and back. Some things I will remember. I always felt at ease being with Uncle Marlin, despite us being in very different worlds. Each morning when I make a smoothie, I take a banana out of an exquisite wooden bowl he gifted to my wife, Linda. My coffee is always poured in a ceramic mug made by one of his friends at the old bag factory. The Sunday phone conversations that often included farming and weather were so important to me. Rest in peace, Uncle Marlin. You were the last sibling of a generation. and you are missed.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Stuckey. I really did not know Marlin that well at all, but I speak probably for hundreds of students. When I came to Goshen, I was in the nursing program, and we had a requirement for a Bible class of some sort, and I don't even remember honestly what it was that we took. It was New Testament or Christianity, some general overview, and it was taught by Marlin Jeschke. And I remember feeling back then that he was a bit intimidating. His diction was very slow, methodical. It was the first time I had really been exposed to, any higher level theological thinking. And it was a course that I remembered and a person. And then recently, I volunteered to play Chinese checkers with a man in what is it called? Assisted living, yeah. And as I would go over there, I would see Marlin just walking in the halls or going to get a cup of coffee. And again, my feeling was, this man is unusual, important. Still maybe somewhat intimidating, because I always had the feeling I'd like to just, sit down and chat with him, but I really, was on my way to do this other volunteer thing. And, but I appreciated just being able to see him and remembering the influence he had on me. Thanks.
I'm Frank's father. This is his mother. It was a great move to Carter Road. I remember early on, Marlin took some of his apples and asked me to go over with him to the cider press over in Middlebury. And that was great. And it was nice being in a neighborhood group that College Mennonite Church had at that time. Later, when Lawrence Burkholder retired, he bought a house in Carter Road. So he would be there, Marlin would be there, Willard and Crable would be there. And between the two Carter Roads and Main Street to the east side lived Merle Jacobs. So what kind of a discussion would you think when you had those four people together? It used to be very interesting. Those were quarterly get-togethers. And I remember Marlin's going to his second wedding to Betty. I remember the Jeschke boys making sure his car was decorated, had a few things to rattle in the back, and they really did it up well. And I also remember that Marlin, we did not have a basketball hoop at our place for a couple years, but Marlin had one. So Sunday afternoon, that was a good time for me to go over with the boys, get the boys together. The Jeschke boys and Frank and Gail would come over, and we'd play in that little concrete slab. Had a lot of fun. There's one other thing I was going to say, but maybe I forgot it. At any rate, it was a good move and enjoyable. Oh, I was going to say the efficiency of Marlin used his time very efficiently. And we had a number of meals together, the two families. And Marlin had always something to do Sunday afternoon, about 2:30, 3 o'clock. He had to get back to doing some preparation or something.
My name is Irvin Beck, and I'm a retired professor of English from Goshen College. Marlin's office was down the hall from mine, and we had many conversations in the hall with Marlin holding his cup of coffee, or at least it was a cup. I don't know if there was any coffee in it. We sometimes talked about language. He was very interested in that. After all, he was, first of all, a major in English before he went into theology and so on. And I remember one particular conversation where he confided in me, sort of quietly. He said, "You know, Irvin, I'm not a very pious person," he said. And that's correct. Marlin was not just a student of the Bible and theology, but he was a philosopher, and he was a student of comparative religions. And all of that qualified his faith and the way he spoke about it. I'm reminded of a line in that familiar song, "Blessed Be the Tie That Binds." It talks about the fellowship of Christian minds is like to that above. Marlin was a part of that fellowship of Christian minds in my interpretation of him. I would like to recommend to you one of the last books he wrote, and that is Whose Land is Palestine? It's a very relevant book right now. He wrote it for Christians like us, some of whom still believe that the land of Palestine was God's promised land to the Jews. And I think we need to read his interpretation of the Old Testament in the current political situation.
So I'm Linda Miller. I am the daughter-in-law of Betty. And my kids were the ones that trained Marlin how to be a grandpa. And so some memories from that. When the kids would go over, I mean, Grandma always had activities planned, okay? This is what we do. We're doing this today. And so everything was always planned, but Grandpa was the fun grandpa, okay? Because there was never any agenda. He would push them around on his office chair around the driveway. He would crawl around the floor and give them horseback rides. And so he was the fun grandpa, the spontaneous grandpa, and I sometimes had to remind them that they had to play with Grandma too when they went there. So, but those were some of the fond memories. And then as the kids got older, Marlin often reflected on the fact of how poor he was when he was in college. And so every time he was home, when Grandma wasn't looking, because I'm not sure why she disapproved of this, but she did, he would slip the kids each a $20 bill, okay? And it happened, it was always on the sly, and so Grandma wouldn't see. Grandma was very generous too, but it was in a different way. It was through college education where she was generous. And Marlin just had these ongoing little $20 bills that just kept coming their way. And for college students, it's cash is always welcome. But he reflected on his years of college and how poor it was, how difficult it was. So we appreciate that.
Thanks.
Betty's brother asked who appreciated his pepper nuts. And I can tell you it's dentists, because you could crack a tooth on those things if you weren't careful. You just got to let them soften up in your mouth before you start chewing on them. Anyway, my dad had a guardian angel after Betty died, and it was my sister Margaret. She made countless trips to... 5 hours round trip just for a doctor's appointment. She would survey his apartment, know exactly what he needed, run to Walmart and get it. Anyway, I just wanted to express real appreciation for my sister for what she did. And a lot of people said how nice the service was today. Most of that comes to Margaret, because she's very creative and very talented, and her touch shows through this service. The saying is, behind every great woman is a great man. And so I can't also not mention Bart, who's been steadfast in his support of Margaret. It was always very kind and patient with my dad. And I just wanted to express appreciation for that. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Any other reflections?
My name is Tyler Jeschke. I'm Eric and Amy's son, Marlin's grandson. And growing up with Marlin as a grandfather was a great blessing for me. And as I grew older, I started to realize how difficult it must have been for Marlin to live such a long and happy life, but also to see all of his children and his grandchildren live so far away, to live through the unfortunate passing of 2 wives, and to seem sort of isolated in Goshen from a lot of his family. And I'd just like to thank him for instilling that devotion to family and to faith and to all of us that now draws us together in his passing. And so we may once again be together in remembrance of what an amazing man he was.
I'm going to pass the microphone back to Phil.
Thank you, Frank. I'll just, I guess, have the last word. One of the last times that I had an interaction with Marlin would have been, I think this was June, David, and we go around. Our pastors go around, and we have communion in different places. And we were having communion at assisted living at Greencroft, where Marlin lived. And people generally don't remember that this is happening, so we have to go around and knock on doors to remind them. And so I went to knock on Marlin's door, and David was there visiting from Seattle. And Marlin realized what was happening, that we were having communion, and it was his church, his college Mennonite church. And this was his family, his people, and that really meant something to him. And he felt, this is my read, and you might have read it differently, he also felt that he couldn't just leave. You came all the way to Seattle to see him, and he didn't want to just leave you there. And so he kind of asked for permission to go do that. But I was struck by his sense of connection. That connection was important to him. And that's sort of maybe the other side of not being pious, but community, and his community, his church community, his particular church community, this particular group of people was important to him. And he was a part of it, and that mattered. So I just want to tell that story and note that was a pretty central part of his life. And we are grateful at College Mennonite Church, speaking for all of us, that Marlin's been a part of our church for more than 60 years.